Welcome back, CSE 121, Fall 2020, to our Exercise 7, RGB-Hex, and now we're going to be using our if-else conditional statements so that we can convert the numbers over 10 to letters like we would do to make true hex numbers. Now we made sure everything's working here, we just have to put in our conditional. So the ending of this will be exactly like it is here. So we're just going to move that. This will be at the end. So we just have to determine things before we print it out. And because this is our printout, we want to keep this at the end. We don't want to do anything before we generate our ending here because we have to generate variables that are then going to get put into here. So we're going to be modifying our variables if they're over 10. Otherwise, they'll just be the same they are. If they're numbers 0 through 9, they'll be fine. So we're going to start an if condition. So we're going to start our header of our if statement here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say if hex 16 is equal, and we'll start with 10. If it's equal to 10, and then make sure you put your colon and then your return, what's going to happen? Well, then hex 16 is going to be A. So it's going to be set to A, and we could just use it as the string. So it's going to be converted to a string here once we reassign it. So that's what's happening here. So this is pretty easy. So we're just going to repeat this process just like we did with letter grade. So I'm going to go here, copy, paste it. Now, you could just keep doing ifs. I just want to mention this because I think last semester we kept using ifs, and they work kind of the same way, except if is true here, it'll still always go and check if again, because they're not technically within the same block when you use multiple ifs. You have to use kind of the chain, the if, elif, else, for it to kind of stop working. Now, even if it gets right here, it'll keep going through there. And the only reason I mention that is we tried to do something so that if a number was over a certain number and it checked the if again and it said it was a string and then it gave an error. So you really want to keep using the elifs here. So it goes through here. So if it's not that, it goes through that. It goes through that. It goes through that instead of rechecking it again. So you probably won't understand that until you run into that situation of getting an error like that. But trust me, just use the elifs here. So this one's going to be 11, and these are pretty easy. So I'll just copy and paste these a bunch of times, bring all these out to the margin, and I'll make sure I have my C, D, E, and F, and I'll make sure I change these numbers to 12, 13, 14, and 15, because when you're copying and pasting, it's very easy to forget to do stuff like that. So there's all our hex 16s. Everything looks okay, and you might be saying, well, do we need an else? No, we don't necessarily need an else. If it's catching all these numbers, we don't have to put an else in there. If it's something other than that, because we're using all equals here, so we don't necessarily have to put an else, but we are going to put another kind of if conditional block for our hex 1s. But let's see if this works first. Let's see if 1 works before we copy and paste this. So I'm going to save this, and I'll run it, and I'll put in 255, and it says F15. That's actually what we want. It's doing the F, it's just not doing the 1s yet. So that's working, and that's easy enough. We should be able to copy and paste this whole thing, and I'll just make a whole new block, and I'll just put a space in between and paste it and just move this over. Now we don't have to have this one adjoining that. We can have start a new block here, and we just have to make sure that we do all this. Now this can be a problem. Let me just show you one thing here. Now some of the other IDEs will make this a little bit easier, but let's say you want to make these all hex 1. You don't have to go through every single thing. What you could do here is you could copy this and do a Control-C or Command-C, copy that, and then go here, highlight on this one, and then hold down your Control key or your Command key on Mac and double click, and you can highlight all of these that have hex 16. Now that they're all highlighted, I can paste, and I'll do Command-V since I'm on a Mac. You can do Control-V if you're on Windows, and now it pastes them all at one time. That's a little bit easier than editing every single one. So these all say if hex 1 comes up to 10, it's using A, so everything works out okay. So let's just save that, and let's try it out. Down here, I'll put in 255 right away, and it's coming up as FF. So everything's working okay. But what if someone puts in a number higher than 255? Well, let's just see. Let's run it. Let's be a wise guy and put in 256. Now it will come up with a number. It's figuring out a number higher than that to do that, and I'm not sure the math exactly. I'd have to scribble it down and see how it's doing the math, but it's figuring it out in some way, so it is doing the math for you. It is still figuring out how many 16s go in that higher number. It's just giving you a different kind of value for an output. But we want to avoid that because that's not really that accurate. Plus it's giving us 3 digits, so we don't want 3 digits. So we're trying to avoid that. So what we could do, think about what we could do. We could catch if anything is higher than this, we could go here and just put another elif and say if hex 16 is greater than, now it still has to be a number when we say this, so if we say the number is greater than 15, and we put a colon here, what we're going to do is we're going to say hex 16, and we're going to put a little message, and we're going to say equals, because we're still assigning it, and we'll just put a little string here, and we'll say please enter, obviously they didn't if it is going over there, so please enter 0 through 255, and let's see what happens if we do this, if we do a number higher. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to save this, so let's see what happens here if we put in 256. It's saying please enter 0, 255, and then it's putting a 0. So it's still putting 0, 1, so we're not doing anything yet to catch the ones. Well, how could we catch that? If we know we're getting this, how could we make this kind of like not work? We almost want to say, hey, don't do anything here because we're done. Because if they enter too many here, we don't want to do the ones, but it's still printing out the ones. So we'd have to make the ones be equal to something, either nothing or like an exclamation point. I think I did an exclamation point on the other one. So what can you do? Well, you'd have to make it be based on this. You could say, and let me actually copy this. I'll copy this here and I'll put a second if, and I'll move it back to the margin, and I'll make that an elif because it'll be second. So we'll keep that. But what we'll say is if hex 16 is equal to what? Well, we don't want to say if it's greater than 15, because here's the problem. Well, actually, let's do that. Let's say if hex 16 is greater than 15, then hex 1 is going to be, let's say, nothing. We won't put anything there. So we won't do anything, and then hopefully it'll stop there. So let's see what happens. We'll run it. I'll move this up so we can see it a little better. And I'll put in 256. And we get an error. Now, I wanted to point this out because the reason we're getting an error is because here, if the number is greater than 15, it's hex 16 is now a string. So hex 16 is now a string. And now what we're trying to do here is say, hey, is this string greater than 15? And it's saying, hey, wait a minute, you can't, we can't do that. That's against the rules, and we'll get an error. We're getting a type error. You can't use this operator, this comparison operator, when you're comparing a string and a number. That's really what it's doing. So we have to either just make sure that it's the string that it is now. So you can't do that. You can't use this value because it already checked if it's greater than 15 and converted it into this string. So you can't go back and say, hey, is it still greater than 15? It'll be like, no, error. You can't do that. So what you'd have to do here, just to problem solve this, is since it's now been converted to this string, is just keep it that string and do this. And just say, hey, if it equals to please enter 0 through 255, then enter nothing here, or put an exclamation point or something. You could do anything here. So that would be a way to do it. And I just want to point that out. That's what happened during some of our multiple if statements, because it's jumping to another if here. And it's saying, hey, can you do that? And it can't. So that's why I just wanted to point that out there. So now, if it knows hex 16 is this string, then it's not going to do anything for hex. It'll just put nothing here. You could put a period, you could put an exclamation point, or you could just leave it as an empty string. So let's just try it out and run it again. And this time we'll put in 256. And now it's saying please enter 0 through 255. So we don't have any loop set up to make it go through again. But at least now what's happening is it's ending and it's saying please enter 0 through 255. So if somebody's being a wise guy and entering a number higher than 255, they just have to run it again and do it again. And obviously we could set this up to put in full RGB numbers for the R, G, and the B. It would just be repeating all this kind of stuff. But I think we have a good start with if-else statements and conditional statements. This should give us a good start. I have some reading for you on this as well, so you could review all this stuff. And then we're going to start with loops, because loops will start to make everything faster. So there's less copying and pasting and going back and doing things over again. We're going to start to be more efficient with both for loops and while loops. So we'll be doing that next. But this is exercise 7, so that's all you have to do for that. Just put a comment that you're finished with it in exercise 7 in the unit for, I think I'm just going to put it in unit 5 since it's a quick one for you to finish up, even though we're starting the new week. And with unit 6, we'll start with loops. So that'll be the end of exercise 7.